Great. It looks like we've got a number of folks joining our session now. So thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We hope it's at the end of your workday. We're joined here this evening by a couple of really interesting folks that we're excited to introduce. We will be listening to Ellis Chase go through a really interesting presentation entitled Getting Your Next Job at 40, 50, 60, and 70. This webinar is hosted by the Chicago Booth, New York City chapter, and we will have Ellis speak to us for about 45 minutes, and then we'll save 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. If you have any questions throughout the session, please drop them into the Q&A box, and we will share them with Ellis or save them for the end of the session. And with that, I'll hand it over to our booth alum, Paul Miller, to introduce Ellis Chase.
Thanks, Whitney, and welcome to everyone, and thanks for coming. I am 23, so really this doesn't apply to me, but I won't take up much of your time. I trust Ellis to do this webinar because I have seen him speak, and he was associated with just about one of the best career counseling groups I've ever seen. It was in New York, run by a woman that was just very good. And this is a critical topic for a lot of us, even if you are 23, because you will be older. You'll have to think about getting a job when you're 40, 50, 60, or 70, or even 80. And I think Ellis is very well practiced in this. He's worked for Columbia a lot and other of our competitors. So without taking up more time, I'm happy to introduce Ellis Chase to you.
Thank you, Paul. This is a very exciting night for me. I've been to so many business schools and done so many webinars and appearances and stuff, but it's my very first booth. And that excites me because I know a bunch of alums I've had in my private practice. I also have a very, very good friend who worked with me at Columbia who's there now in career management. So big night for me. And I hope it is for you as well, or you pick up some good stuff from me about career transition. We decided to focus. This was Paul's idea. And it's such an under-discussed topic. It's like one of those things you brush under the rug, or you just say, damn, it's never going to happen because there's so much discrimination, and you just give up. And nothing could be further from the truth. We're talking about those of us, and you hear it constantly, especially in financial services from whence I came. I used to work at the bank that bears my name. And those days, they used to say, if you're over 45, you're dead. And that you were, unless you were at very, very senior management. David Rockefeller was not dead at 45. He was very much thriving. But there's a lot of mythology. So what I want to do in the first part of this is to debunk some of the mythology and talk about ageism. So you'll notice that the first three topics, which are really quick, is a psychological mindset about what is ageism and what's real and what's not real and why does it exist and how can we counter it? And then most importantly, how do we defeat it? How do we get past it? So we're going to end up spending a big chunk of our time talking about that word that I don't like to say in public, networking. I call it relationship building. I like to talk about it in a different context when I'm talking about when you're on search or transition or whatever you want to call it at 45 or 55 or 65. What is it going to be like, and what is the difference, and how can you get rid of not only the burden of the belief system that you carry with you, but how do you get rid of the belief system that other people might carry about you? So we're going to look at myth one. It's impossible to get it and impossible to keep it. Now, look, she was appointed for a lifetime job. I understand she didn't have to look for a job, but she didn't quit. And she was as powerful and as vital and as critical as she possibly could be until the day she died with about 4 different kinds of cancer. So we're talking about RBG here. I think she's the best example of aging aging spectacularly well, but it was a lifetime appointment. So, we have to keep that in track. She defies the idea of hang it up when you're 70. She just defied it. Now, the reality of it is that it's not true. It's essentially not true that if you're 65 years old, hang it up, or you're 70, hang it up. I'm going to give you an example. I was working in my private practice with a guy who was 70, who had gotten laid off from one of the giant banks. Without giving away the bank, and I practically am. He lived in Chicago, interestingly. His daughter and son-in-law were both students of mine at Columbia Business School, where I was a consultant for a very, very long time. And they referred me to him. And in our first conversation, I was shocked that the guy never brought up the R word, retirement. He never said the word. I was really surprised. I thought he was going to say, how can I gracefully go into retirement? But I want to stay involved. And I expected that. This was a guy who lived in Chicago and was commuting weekly to North Carolina. See, that's where I give away one of 2 possibilities of a giant bank. And every week at 70, back and forth to North Carolina. And he never said the retirement word to me. All he talked about was getting another job. So we ran into a wall with it, and the wall was not his age. He had a really interesting niche in financial services. The wall was that he only would consider a full-time job because that's all he considered, all he knew about, all he had ever lived. And I said to him, you might have a real trouble in an industry that is not only notoriously sexist, it's also notoriously ageist. I know a lot of senior people who will last till their 60s, but it doesn't happen that often. But he refused to hear me because he didn't want to break out of his box. And we worked together 3 or 4 times. Next thing I heard is he took a consulting assignment with his former employer. They were really sorry that they had let him go. They needed his skill. Then he started spreading out to a couple of banks in Chicago. He's older than I am. He's 76, 77, somewhere in that vicinity. Still working because I talk to his daughter periodically and I talk to his son-in-law periodically. Still going at it, but he figured out a different way. And he knew there was an institutionalized ageism in the areas where he was aiming. So he focused on the consulting. Now we'll talk about other things that you can focus on. Another friend, this was a close friend of mine, because of a divorce in her 50s, she had to make a living. And she never had. She was very well trained. She was a psychoanalyst, but she only worked a few hours a week. And she had to learn how to network, which is really tough for shrinks. I mean, really tough for shrinks. Most of them are very introverted, and most of them don't like the idea of selling themselves. And she had to learn how to write, how to develop relationships with doctors. Just like every consultant I know, they have to learn how to do the things that many of us who worked in the corporate sphere or in large organizational spheres understand really, really well. And I have to tell you, I sort of nurtured her along every step of the way, kicking and screaming and fighting and yelling. And I mean, she just didn't want to do it. She is now 73. She's busier than she's ever been in her life. She loves it. She's doing really well. And she's gotten great at something that she has no natural abilities at, which is marketing herself. So I like using her as a story at the beginning, because I know there are lots of you out in that virtual world that we're in right now who are saying, I really suck at this. I don't want to do it. I'm not comfortable with it. I'm never going to be able to do it. we'll get you there, because I talk a lot about language a little bit later on. So the reality of this, I can't work at this age. It's just ridiculous. I know too many people who work in their 60s, 70s. I have one guy, a friend who's in his 80s, who's still working full-time as an attorney. He's also probably the only attorney I know personally who likes it, which is quite interesting. The second myth that I wanted to address is that it is all throughout this work sphere, all of it. So you'll notice in the picture, I have a woman maybe in her 50s on the left, and I've got one who's maybe 12 on the right, who's doing the interview. And we've all faced this, those of us who are older. I'm assuming that our group is 45, 55, 60, in the vicinity. And we've all faced the idea. I faced it once on a consulting gig when I was in my 50s, and I went to MTV for a consulting gig. And the woman who interviewed me, I think she was 11. At least she looked like she was 11 to me. She came out in torn jeans, torn t-shirt. She was the head of human resources. I loved that. And so I was prepared, and everybody had warned me at that time. MTV was much bigger than it is now. And it was a very, very youth culture. It was playing to its audience, and it ran itself like that. And I was prepared. And I asked her a few questions about programming, because I had watched MTV and I saw that they were recycling some old TV shows, like it was the Claire Danes show, and I can't remember the name of it, about when she was an adolescent, and they were making a fortune on it. So I asked her about it. I was going to show, I know what I'm talking about. This young woman, this 11-year-old, however old she was, she didn't have a clue. She didn't even know what the show was. She didn't even know the business she was in. All she knew was she looked at me. I was dressed appropriately because I did my research, and all she could see was that I was older, and the conversation would go nowhere. So I got firsthand that it's pervasive, it's around, and I thought, oh, I'm not going to go on these kinds of interviews anymore. This is stupid. And I was wrong. Here's the reality. It exists. It's there. The question is it pervasive? And here are the reasons why it exists. I think you should know it, because this is like a list of you being able to make preemptions, to be able to forestall these perceptions. I'm going to start with the last one, which is the perception is you're going to be too expensive. So one of the things is that on resumes and LinkedIn's and 2-minute pitches and the way you market yourself, don't use the huge title. You talk about the function. Undo the money. Money can happen, but we wait for negotiations for that to happen, not upfront. We don't want to scare people away. Then we have all the rest of these things, this idea that you're not moldable, or that you lack energy, or you're a threat to the person that you're interviewing with. That's a very subtle one. It's a hard one to countermand. Or because you're 55 years old, you might have health problems. You may be in perfect health, but the perception is out there. So you need to preempt. And by preempting, that means a lot of energy. If you are a slow talker, work on it. If you are not a person who is doing what I'm doing here, look, I use my hands a lot when I'm talking. Oh, yeah, I'm a New York City person. I can't help it. But it's using the hands, moving, smiling a lot, showing energy for what you love. These are preemptions that you have a lot of energy. So I have been able to get away personally with murder because I can show a lot of energy. The threat, that's their problem, and you don't want to work for a person who's going to be threatened by you anyway. But you talk about the energy and you are that energetic person, that gets rid of the health possibility of perception there. These are ways to preempt right away. Now there's more. How do we defeat it? I gave you a few preemptions. Now I'm going to tell you overall, what are the ways that we defeat ageism in the marketplace? First of all, it's not all over the place. So the way that you defeat that feeling of it's not being all over the place is you've got to build your numbers. So if you're thinking that when I'm building networks and I say, I've got to have 3 or 4 meetings a week, I'm going to say, you've got to have 6. You've got to see more people. You've got to open more doors. You've got to build more relationships, because the numbers will help you defeat, let's say, 3 or 4 out of 10 people are ageist. Well, if you're seeing 10, that means 6 of them are not. So that means we've got to create higher odds propositions. I'm a big believer in creating higher statistical probabilities for success in search. And that means number. Energy we talked about. Doing the preemptions. But most of all, the most important thing is, once and for all, you're going to have to be great at relationship building. I don't care how introverted you are. We can learn the language. I don't care if you hate it. I do. I really don't enjoy building networks, and I've had to. I'm a consultant. I've absolutely had to. I've figured out my own way. My own way is to do things like this, to keep an active website, to circulate it, to get on LinkedIn a lot. That's my way of networking. I don't give great lunch. You know, I don't enjoy it. I don't want to do a lot of dinner. I don't like to drink that much, you know. So I'll do it if necessary. If one of them invites me, I will. And if it's a big corporate client, yeah, I'll do it. I don't like it. So I figure out alternative ways, which gets us now into what is really the subject about defeating ageism. And that's developing great networking technique and understanding what networking really means. It is not what a lot of you have been taught over the years. It is not asking everybody, you know, do you have a job? Do you have any leads? Which of course is going to get everybody running in the opposite direction as fast as possible. So we have to understand how the numbers support us. Now look at this. I want you to look at all these means, and I want you to notice the size of things as we go down the page. Okay, I'll tell you the numbers as we go along. You take a look at networking relationships, you see what it is. The fact that you all are participating in an alumni association function is a great thing. As I used to say, at the 5 orientations that I led at Columbia Business School, we had 5 for different programs, 5 a year, I would start out by saying, I guess you all think that you're here because Joe Stiglitz is, you're going to get him for an economics class, or you're going to get Glenn Hubbard, or you're going to get Bruce Greenwald, who was, you know, who was Warren Buffett's acolyte, and you're going to get all these superstar Nobel Prize winners. And I'm sure you did the same thing at Chicago, same exact thing. And I'll say, yeah, they're nice, but you can get them practically at any of the best business schools. Not the main reason that you're there. The main reason you're there is look around you. That's why you're here. It's networking for life, and it's the alumni database. And you don't even need the alumni database at Booth. What you need is the alumni database from Booth on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a great new functionality over the last 3 years. And you really don't need the university database, which is always 5 years behind anyway. LinkedIn isn't. Because if you're not on LinkedIn, you're not there, you're not out there, you're nowhere. So this particular number is roughly 80% of all jobs are found through relationships. I have never seen anything less than 75% in all the surveys. I look at them every year. I go through all of the magazines. I want to make sure I'm up to date on this. Social media is getting bigger, mostly because of the one that I mentioned here. I don't have a number attached to this, but LinkedIn is getting more and more and more important. LinkedIn recruiting is for real. And I think most of you know that. It does exist. It's not like when you see other executive search postings and you're not sure that the job still exists. LinkedIn's is real. So social media has increased a share. Nobody agrees on the numbers anymore, so I don't even bother to post them. You will notice what's not up there. I don't use the evil empire at all because I think it's useless, except in a couple of fields like advertising. Facebook is useful. Instagram could be useful for something. I don't know for what, but it can be useful. Twitter can be useful, but not for most professions. They're really not useful. Job boards, what we used to call ads, which, let's say in the old days, in my old days, it was New York Times advertising section. Even in the best of years, they only accounted for maybe 5% of all jobs filled. Recruiters, look, we're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. 5-6% of all jobs filled through recruiters, really? Civil service and unions, 5% of jobs, but that doesn't apply to this crowd very much. I doubt there's one person, maybe there's one person who works in government. I don't know. Usually we had one at Columbia, somebody who was doing that, particularly when Michael Bloomberg was mayor. There were several who did go to work for government. Now, that number, civil service 5%, executive search 5%, job boards 5%, social media, I have no idea, networking and relationships 75, 80%, somewhere in that vicinity. And my favorite, throwing out resumes to human resources. Look at that. I had to put it in red. It's a waste of electricity if you're sending it virtually, and it's a waste of forestry if you're sending paper. It is the single dumbest way of looking for a job. I'm just telling you, sending out random resumes to random human resources people or to random decision makers is useless. I know when I was at Chase, I ran the technology recruiting for the corporation. This is a long time ago. Such a long time ago that I can talk to any of the technology people in this room about IBM 370s. That's how long ago. I got to tell you, if I got random notes, and I ran the recruiting for IT there, if I ever got a random note, it just got thrown out because it wasn't about something I was looking for. It wasn't, I was an order taker. So it had to be something to do with what I was doing. So this technique is terrible. So look at the top here. Just look at that first one. If it's 75, 80, 85% of all jobs are filled that way, then why do so many people spend so much time on job boards when that's only 5 or 6%? I don't get that. I don't get clients who walk into my private practice office and say, I've sent out 400 resumes to ads and I've gotten one response. What's wrong with my resume? It's not what's wrong with your resume. It's that you probably didn't even get read. And I know that for a fact because I was the one running the half-page ads in the New York Times, and we get 5,000 responses. And maybe I looked at 100. What, am I going to read 5,000 resumes? No, I'd read enough. So it's not a great technique. I'm not saying ignore it. I'm just saying keep it in its place and focus on number one, which is what we're going to focus on right now.
Hey, Ellis, before
Yes.
we move on, can I ask a question we have from the audience?
Absolutely.
At the executive level, wouldn't recruiters be higher on the list?
Yes. In certain areas, like in C-suite, in technology, believe it or not, sometimes the numbers, depending on the discipline, could get as high as maybe 20%, 25%. If it's C-suite with a very, very specific role attached to it and a company that doesn't mind spending a fortune on it, it could be 30, 40%. It could be, but that's C-suite, or it's niche. Profound niche. Good question. Thank you for asking that, because I like to make that differentiation. From the other side of the desk, if you're throwing paper at people or if you're throwing emails at people looking for jobs, this is what you're up against. I just want you to visualize it. You're not going to get noticed. You get noticed through personal relationships. Now, that's me. I'm the second guy there, right? Well, you see me, so that's me. We have three great philosophers and me there. And I'm going to tell you three philosophies of networking. Number one, never ask for a job. Never, ever ask someone for a job. Why? Because it's cornering them, makes them uncomfortable, and it's going to make them run in the fastest direction possible. So when you grew up hearing people say, knock on doors, knock on as many doors as possible. No. Knock on the door when you have an appointment with the person. That's when you knock on the door. But this whole notion of asking people for jobs or for leads is just, forget it. It's so 1955. We're not interested in that. 2, I've got to figure out shortcuts because I can't do all the stuff that Ellis is talking about coming up. Well, you got it. There are no shortcuts. There are none. 3, I'm going to quote the late, great psychoanalytic thinker, Bruno Bettelheim, who said, maturity is the ability to delay gratification. I want to say it again. I want you to hear this. Maturity is the ability to delay gratification, which means I can't expect the job interviews to come floating down on my head after I've had 5 networking meetings. I have to work that networking. I have to keep them warm. I have to stay in touch, and I've got to build the numbers. So I have to tell you the truth of maturity is the ability to delay gratification. The truth is he was writing about adolescent sexuality, which always makes me laugh because it's so perfect for networking that I had to use it. But think about what the origin of it is. Maturity is the ability to delay gratification. Makes sense. So the 3 philosophies of networking. Now, I hate the word. We all know the reference to the picture, I hope. If you were alive, I'd say show of hands. Does everybody know who that is? And I'm assuming because we are talking about older people on search, you better know this 1959 reference. I hate the word because it sounds like when you say it to people that you're actually doing it with, it sounds like you're saying, hi, I want to exploit you, which is terrible. It's just terrible. So really you want to use euphemisms. And I said this program is a lot about words. The best words I think are market research. I'm doing some market research about my next move, or I'm doing a due diligence. And it makes you look smarter and it doesn't make them feel guilty or want to run away from you. But don't use this word, please. Use it in a classroom like we're in right now, or virtual classroom that we're in right now. That's fine, it's shorthand. First thing you got to do is triage. A-list, all the people you feel comfortable with who are preferably a level or 2 above where you're looking. And the most important aspect of it is you find it easy to call them and you know they're going to be helpful. B-list, all of the above, except it's tricky to call them. So in my private practice, we spend a lot of time talking about Bs, like the person you haven't seen in 7 years and you feel really, really weird calling them out of the blue for this reason. C-list, people who know people. That sounds like people who need people are the luckiest people in the world. No. C-list could be the person who cuts your hair, if at our age you have it. Or it could be your dentist. It could be someone you know socially who might know people. So it's one step away. You've got to get this together. And I'm telling you, between A, B, and C lists, if you have 5 people total, think about this, 5 people total, your search is made. Even if 3 of them don't work out, or they put you off, or they don't return a phone call. If you get 2 of them, and 2 of them give you a good idea, maybe a recruiter, which is a good way to see a recruiter, get a personal referral, and 3 other people to talk to, well, those 2 people have started to, here's my visual aid, right? You're starting to build the network. It's flying out, it's building, even though you may not have gotten referrals from the first 3 people. So you start with your triage. Understand that if you're going to have more than 5 people, and if you've stayed in touch with alumni groups, you definitely have more than 5 people. So this is about positive reinforcement. People aren't going to remember you because you were brilliant, witty, charming, and beautiful on one meeting. They're going to remember you because they've had repeated contact with you. So we're going to make either a phone or a letter or email, or a phone and an email, have a meeting, follow it up, and then I'm going to list later on. And number 5 is what makes networking. Number 5 is where you hear about interviews. Number 5 is where you defeat the ageism in the marketplace because you've built your numbers. So 5 is the most critical piece here, even though we're going to talk about all of them. And approach email. Since you'll be able to see this, the video, this is a standard approach to email. Let's say you wrote an invitation on LinkedIn, you know, your 140 characters or whatever it is, asking for a connection. Then you can write this. You can write anything after somebody's accepted. By the way, if you write to a fellow alum from Booth, your chances are phenomenally high the person will say yes. If a person says no or doesn't respond, then they just didn't get business school. They didn't understand what it was about, that it was a waste of money and a waste of time and would be a waste of your time. Seriously. Because if you don't know that building relationships is the source of business, then you don't get business. And what are you doing here? But this is a very good approach. There is one thing I want you to notice in it. The last sentence, I'll contact you next week to see if we can arrange either of these possibilities. You are always proactive. You are never reactive in job search unless somebody specifically says to you, we'll get back to you in exactly 10 days. Then you have to be reactive because they're telling you not to call. But in this, you're not going to say, I look forward to hearing from you. That's a terrible sentence. Don't use, I look forward to hearing from you. Bad. It's got to be, I will call you. Now, in the ageism context, being more proactive is less expected because you're seen as low energy or someone who's not going to go after it or be moldable or be the really, really assertive person at work. You want to come off that way. You want to be that way. So it's, I'm going to contact you. And you may try several times. Think about it. Why several times? You're all thinking, or some of you are thinking right now, yeah, I'm going to be a real pain in the butt here. I'm going to be driving people crazy. That's not the way to go through this. Yes, it is. Yeah, it could be 5 or 6 times. Try a phone call. Try another email. Change the time of day. I could go on. I have an advanced networking class that I've done many times where one of the slides talks about the best time of day to call and when not to call. For example, Monday morning after a long weekend. Don't call. Bad time. Lunchtime. Very mixed about that one because if somebody's at their desk, they'll answer the phone. I don't know. We could talk about that some other time. Point is being assertive, being proactive, taking charge. I will call you. You're never, and you know, I think there are 2 things that somebody walking into this office, well, this is my private practice office, when people walk in here and I meet them for the first time, and well, that hasn't happened in 15 months. On Zoom, they'll say to me, I've sent out 400 resumes and 500 invitations on LinkedIn, and nobody's gotten back to me. And that's easy for me. I'll just say, well, you're doing your search wrong. If you're sitting around waiting for people to get a hold of you, you're never going to get a job. You have to be the one to follow up. Must be. Some language here. You get a gatekeeper? Here's a quote for you. Here's 2 quotes. Now, let's say they say, oh, were you looking for a job? And you're going to say, no. It's not about that. It's about some personal market research, right? Now, here's where you can get a little sketchy. I don't mind sketchy sometimes in job search. Sometimes you got to do stuff, right? So the sketchy thing is, it has to do with a communication we've had. Well, it is a communication. You wrote an email. You're not saying they didn't answer you. You wrote an email. So this is good language here. or you actually get the person that you're looking for. And here's some language for you. This is, I'm investigating conditions and I'm checking out. I'd love to ask for your insights. I promise it's not going to be more than a half hour. And I'm not putting you on the spot right now. I'm hoping that we can figure out a time to talk. And who knows? Get this. Who knows? There may be something I can help you with at some point. Always the implied or stated quid pro quo, either in writing or when you're talking to somebody. Or what I call the apology, which I find very effective. I'm sorry to intrude on your time. You're acknowledging the other side of the desk. Always acknowledge the other side of the desk. And then I recently wrote to you about, and then you can go into exactly the language that we talked about earlier. I hope you're getting the point. To me, in networking, in relationship building, language is everything. That's why I don't like the word networking, and I like market research, and I like due diligence. Love those words. They sound so business-like. Okay, the follow-up email, and I'm not going to dissect a bunch of emails. These are just the only two I'm going to show. This is after a networking meeting or even after an interview. There's always a follow-up. We've got to have several steps of follow-up here. So I'm thanking the person, and don't go into, I know how valuable your time is. That stuff always makes me feel ill. We know it. They took the time, thank them. That's it. Then reiterate what they offered or what they said they would do, and maybe add something that you didn't get a chance to talk to, or maybe they expressed interest in something you were talking about and you want to tell them a little bit more about it here. And there's that quid pro quo again. Please do not hesitate to call me if there's anything I could do to return the favor. So that is follow-up number one. Imperative within 24 hours of any meeting, because you want to cement the marketing. Always want to cement the marketing. And now we have a bunch of other follow-ups, because you can be witty, charming, beautiful, funny, immensely qualified, incredibly good at your work, but you're going to be forgotten 20 seconds later, or maybe an hour later if you were really good. So there's got to be a number of follow-ups. And I'm going to list a few of them here. The first one we talked about, which was that follow-up email. And there it is. Then there's another one. How about telling them about a person they referred you to? That's a great excuse to get your name in front of people right away. How great is that? Or, I read something. We all get these from people all the time, and we never read it, but I just read something that made me think of our conversation. And you're reminding the person, this is the positive reinforcement. Remember the steps before? This is all the steps. We don't want them to forget about you. Now, maybe you have stumbled into an interview and you want to write to this person because they may know about the company, and you'd like to talk to somebody who may know about the company. That's a great idea. So what we've done is we've had at least 4 good follow-ups. They're not going to be able to forget you. This is where people screw up in networking. This is it. Recruiters taught it to me years ago, executive search people, because I had 350 executive search people under contract at Chase. And the best ones were the ones who stayed in touch, so I couldn't forget them. Some of them were really repulsive. Some of them offered kickbacks. Some of them offered things that I'll tell you in a private conversation sometime, which you would not believe. But the repeated contact was the critical issue, and that's how I remembered people. Right, how far can you go with all of this? If anybody in our virtual room remembers the movie The Black Swan, I call it the line of obnoxiousness. How far can you get? I talked about 5 follow-ups or 4 follow-ups. Can we go to 6? Can we go to 7? Can we go to 8? My version of what is the best number, the woman who ran the job search group that Paul referred to earlier, where he saw me speak, must have been 20 years ago, She would say it takes an average of 5 or 6 times to even get hold of somebody. She was a very assertive person. But the line of obnoxiousness is, if you're thinking, I'm really being obnoxious, I'm being a pain here, how far can I go with this? My answer is go one step over the line, what your line is, because on search, in transition, you're very sensitive. And you're going to probably take things a little too sensitively or too personally. So go one more step. And that's my answer to the question about how far do you go with the line of obnoxiousness before you do truly become oppressive in the bargain. Now we get to some metrics. I've got an MBA group here. I got to talk metrics. How do I know I'm building the relationships effectively? How do I know this? A meeting can be measured by these 3 items. 1, I've kept the person warm, and that's what recruiters always call it, keeping people warm. They want their applicants to make sure that they're staying in touch with them if they think they're a valuable property and haven't forgotten about them. You're doing the same thing. So making sure that you're staying in touch is a big piece of it. 2, and this is the key to a networking meeting. Some of you are wondering, what the hell am I going to do for a half hour? Am I going to chat? Am I going to talk about the picture of their ugly kids on the desk? What am I going to do in there? What you're going to do is be prepared with 5 or 6 questions. And there are 2 kinds of questions that you need. An information question, which is something that reflects that you've done your homework. Piece of cake. You've really found out about the organization. You're MBAs, you know you're supposed to do this. And you ask questions like, I understand you're building a presence in the upper Midwest now, and you're going against them and them. What's going to be your angle? What's going to be your unique selling proposition here? So that shows that you know what you're talking about and you're an insider. Have a couple of questions like that and add in my favorite, which is, how did you get to this point? Because you may get some great ideas when somebody starts talking about themselves, and it's also an ego thing. You're appealing to people's egos when you're asking for advice. So business questions. And then the second kind, marketing questions. Here's a classic marketing question. These are the ones you really want to ask. When you are looking to hire here, what do you look for? What a great question. You get 4 answers to that, and you start to be able to fix your pitch up, fix your presentation, and make yourself fit the market that you have found out about. Or another question, what's your perception of my market out there from what I've told you about myself? Or what do you see the future of risk management in this area? Anything about the market. So you've gone in with 4, 5, 6 questions. There's your half hour, and you don't have to worry about the idle chit chat. You don't have to, because you're ready for substantial questioning. The last thing you do, the 3rd metric for the successful networking meeting, is asking for other people to talk to. Last thing, you're getting up, you're not shaking hands anymore. You're elbow bumping. And you're getting up and you're saying, oh, by the way, could you think of anybody it might be worth my while to talk to like you and I are talking? That's a little open-ended and a little difficult for some people. So I have another way of doing it. Sneaky. Have a printed list of 20 organizations. Say, can I email this to you right now? Email it to them. And I'm curious to know what you think of my list. Make sure their company is on it, because you don't want to insult them, and hope that they will say, oh, I know so-and-so who works there. It's a way of jogging memory. I find it a very effective way of building your network. Summation, if you get one of these 3 items on a networking meeting, you've had a successful meeting. If you've had 3, you've had a great networking meeting. If you haven't gotten any, you need to help get your technique up. You've got to get it going. Too many people I know are not getting anything out of the meeting. They come back and they say, what a really lovely woman. She was She was funny. She was great. We really hit it off. And I'll say, well, what'd you learn? Did you get any names? Do you think you have a future of a relationship going on? Did you write the follow-up email? And I get a bunch of no's. But I really liked her and she really liked me. Sorry, it's not going to do it. Now, another metric. This is such an oblique graphic here. I see the word stage 3 times, so I decide to put up something from the theater. I'm going to have to change this at some point. But this is something that I stole directly from that same woman that Paul was referring to earlier tonight. Stage 1. This is how you judge the nature of the people that you're talking to. Stage 1 people are peers. And that's what you're going to start out with most of the time. And they're great for penetrating companies and they're great from getting basic information. If you're spending your whole search with stage 1 people, you're not going to get a job. Probably. Stage 2 people are people who are the same, except they have great connections to decision makers or the reporting to decision makers. And that's what we aim for. We want stage 2 people, and especially stage 3, and you can guess what that is, decision makers. It's a way of figuring out how successful am I in my relationship building? Am I moving towards the decision makers? If you're not, this whole thing is not going to work unless you get lucky, unless the lightning happens. And I've had lots of clients where lightning has struck. You know, you just stumble into something. But if you're going to work the system, like I want you to work the system and work the numbers so we can defeat the ageism, then we've got to be getting to decision makers, people who hire people, people who make those decisions. That's your other metric for figuring out, am I doing this right? Am I good at it? Now, a lot of people think that being an extrovert is imperative. I come up with different extroverts on every deck I do this class on, and I love this one. It's good to be an extrovert. It gives you a leg up. But you know something? You could be the most introverted human being. You could be a person who doesn't like answering the telephone, which I'm one of those. I don't like answering the telephone. I like email. But if you don't like it to reach out, or it makes you feel ill, or making a phone call, or writing a LinkedIn invitation to a stranger, you know what? Learn the language. All the stuff we talked about earlier, all those quotes that I threw in there, learn the language, get comfortable with it. And then you'll get comfortable with this. I promise, I have yet to meet a client or MBA student who couldn't get good at this, who couldn't learn the language. So I'll never accept, I just suck at this. I'm just terrible at this. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. Yes, you can. Yeah, you can. And there are alternative means of building networks. I mentioned a couple I use. Well, one of them is an extroverted thing I do, which is this. A lot of public speaking, a lot of webinars, a lot of, and writing and posting and blogging and all the rest of this stuff. So don't think you've got to be the world's leading extrovert. Now, what about in social settings? What about at an alumni holiday party? Right? Does everybody, I gotta know, I have to know if I'm dating myself. Does everybody know this? How do I find out here? Somebody would write, oh, I can't get it. Okay, here's what I really want to ask. This is Animal House. That's John Belushi. I would like to know, and you could write it in either chat or quick Q&A, just write it in. I want to see at the end of the class, how many people know what the real college was? I know what it was because my kid went there and she showed me the house. And then I found out she was right. I thought she was making it up, but it was absolutely the truth. So I'm curious if you know what the real college was.
We have one person answering in the chat or in the Q&A, and I feel
what'd she say?
It's Dartmouth.
It is Dartmouth.
Which,
yes.
Yeah.
It absolutely is Dartmouth. I'm impressed to that person Right?
Two people now.
So yeah, I was surprised that it was Dartmouth, except that there's nothing else to do in Hanover. To wrap up so we can get to some questions, and I'm really impressed with myself that we have time for questions because I talk so much. I can't do a program without plugging my own books. Gotta plug my own books. The book on the left, which is in print or an ebook, I wrote for MBAs. And I can't say this to most groups that I speak to. I can to this. I was working with executive MBAs exclusively at Columbia for 15 years. People who had no time, full-time MBAs, MBA alums have no time. They never have time. That's who I wrote the book for. It's I used to refer to it as the anti-parachute book. And some of you have read Parachute. I don't know very many people who have ever finished it because it's a 40,000-page book of religious beliefs. It's so inappropriate. I really dislike that book, but the guy made millions of dollars. So, a little credit where credit is due. This is a very short book, and it's a shut up and get to the point book. So and I expanded one chapter, the one we happen to be talking about tonight, into a shorter, it's just an ebook, the networking book, and really got into it more than we did tonight on networking. I also have a website that has most of this stuff on it. A lot of blogs, a lot of videos. There's one of me doing negotiations. That's the most popular one at a reunion at Columbia. There's a ton of stuff up there for you to use, and you're more than welcome to go on it. You can tell I'm a marketing genius, right? ellischase.com. I thought long, hard hours about that. Let's get to some questions. Whitney or Denise, can you help me here?
Ellis, we have a couple of questions flowing through, so we'll start at the top. Yeah. So this one relates a little bit to something that you mentioned not doing, but we're still curious on your view on the resume box filtering for keywords. We know that relates to that bottom rung that you had mentioned staying away from, but would love your view regardless.
I'm not a believer in the whole keyword thing, because if you have a good resume, and we're really talking about LinkedIn now, let's face it. So if you have a good resume, the keywords will be there. You can't avoid them. So I think writing a resume around keywords is a waste of your energy and time. I just don't believe that it makes that much difference, because they're going to be there anyway. Especially for IT people, because you can't write the resume without them. If you're an investment banker, there are words that you can't avoid, and in most professions you can't. If you're in marketing and in social media, again, there are words you can't avoid. So I really hope that you don't go out of your way to think about keywords. Go out of your way to have a decent resume and a decent LinkedIn profile. The words will be there. Sorry, great. I couldn't do better than that. Yeah.
A quick follow-up on that. Would that suggest that one should include the detail from the resume on LinkedIn to make sure that the detail is picked up?
No, because if a recruiter on LinkedIn is interested, they're going to go look for your resume. LinkedIn should not be your resume, because you're going to lose your audience fast. LinkedIn should be maybe a couple of job description bullets, and that's it. Not too heavy on the results, even though you can have some. There should be an about section, which is the same thing as a summary on a resume, except that not everybody requires a summary on a resume. Certainly financial services, most financial services people don't. They use deal sheets instead. But summary, about, and 2-minute pitch are all of a piece. They're all very much the same. But don't put your resume on LinkedIn, because people won't read it.
Great, thank you. So you touched a little bit on ideas for follow-ups from the specific hiring manager. And if someone's already met with the hiring manager and they're interested in still speaking with that person versus somewhere else and getting more into their brain space and action from that person, what are some other ideas around specific follow-up?
You mean seeing the person a second time?
And getting in front of them, I believe.
Oh, you mean so you had, let's say, a Zoom talk and you'd like to meet them in person when people are meeting in person? Am I?
Yes, I think that the way that I'm reading the question is the follow-ups. I think you touched on the follow-ups and ways
That's not
to.
bad. That's not bad. You know, somebody just came up, whoever asked that question just came up with a pandemic job search question. It's like, we saw each other on FaceTime or Zoom or Skype. I'd love to meet you in person. There's so much more I'd like to ask. And I promise 20 minutes and I would be very grateful. And always be hypersensitive to the other side of the desk. So yeah, I think that's a great idea in this context. I like it. Almost as good as when I wrote a little blog on this on LinkedIn. I had a client who had an offer from a CEO of a small bank. And of course, it was all Zoom. And he was negotiating with human resources on money and all the rest of it. And the human resources person called her that day and said, the CEO is uncomfortable hiring you without meeting you. The offer is intact. Nothing's going to change. Would you be amenable to meeting the CEO on a park bench in Central Park? I swear this is the truth. And they did. Sat on opposite ends. They were masked. This is about 5 months ago. And they met. And this is incredible, but the following week it happened to somebody else, except it was Riverside Park. I didn't understand what the significance of the park was, but I just had to throw that story in. It always makes me laugh. Any others?
Yeah, we've got a couple more. So this one relates to how you should approach someone if you have multiple connections to the person. So specifically, if you have 2 connections, for example, to a stage 3 person, one within the organization, but more junior, should you go with the internal person or a stronger external?
Stronger external, stronger anything, period. Internal doesn't necessarily mean anything. I like stronger.
Great.
More senior, easier connection.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next question. How quickly do you need to send the thank you email following a meeting? Same day, next day, within a week?
24 hours, come hell or high water. Notice how ready I was for that one. 24 hours for that, 24 hours for an interview. You need to cement the interview or the networking meeting. You need to be able to repeat things that you talked about so that they remember you, and then get a chance to add things that you forgot to bring up. By the way, love that in an interview. By the way, I thought it might be interesting for you to know that. And I look forward to talking with you again. Not, I look forward to hearing from you.
Beautiful, crystal clear. Another follow-up related question. How often should you follow up with a recruiter after an initial meeting when they have said they don't have any opportunities at the moment?
Follow up with a recruiter?
Yes.
I'm not that big on following up with recruiters to begin with, because if there's money to be made, they'll find you. That's it. But if you want to touch base, like 2 or 3 times total, that's okay. But I wouldn't make it a monthly thing. They'll find you. If they need you, they'll find you. Don't worry. I'm not a big fan of the whole profession, and I don't like the numbers. I have been known to refer to recruiters as pimps, because that's what I think of. I think I had some really horrible experiences when I was running that recruiting area at Chase. 6% of your market, or if you're in C-suite and it's up to 30 or 40%, you can't ignore it. You can't ignore postings. You can't ignore any of this. But as a major means for job search success, I just don't see recruiters being the biggest. I think tonight's subject is not only the biggest in terms of general career transition, it's the biggest by far in terms of defeating the ageism in the workplace. That's the big thing. So people get to see you and see the energy and see that they're not wheeling you in on a cart because you can't raise your head. You know, it's not seeing you that way. They want to see a vibrant, energetic, smiling, happy, excited person.
So
by
Ellis,
standing
on that
there. Yeah, go ahead.
on that note, Ellis, then this is related to the ageism. So can you talk about the being the threat part that you mentioned? For example, in the startup community, then you might see people who are at least 10 to 20 years younger. Do you have any suggestions on how to approach that? I recall in the beginning you said, don't worry about it, it's their problem, not yours. But if you're thinking about it from the perspective of a startup that has that culture and you might stand out, how would you address?
Big question. One way that it gets expressed is if it's an interview, they say you're overqualified, and your answer always to that is, then perhaps I've miscommunicated. I see it as a great match because, and then you go bullet by bullet by bullet. Now, in the networking meeting, when you perceive that they're threatened by, I had this happen to me. I actually went on a job interview last year. I haven't looked for a job since 1997. And somebody from Columbia, a former student of mine, said, we need you here. We definitely need you here. I said, I don't want a job. And they said, well, we can make it into a consulting thing. Da, 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 da. Well, I interviewed with a very, very young woman who was clearly threatened by me. She was 30 and I was at least twice her age at the time. And there was very little I could do except to say to her what a great fit I was to the things she was describing, and focus on that. Don't focus on what you want to do 5 years from now. Don't focus on what your ambitions are. Don't focus on all the things you can do. Focus on what a great match it is. That makes you way less of a threat. Unfortunately, this woman, I just didn't like her. I couldn't, and the idea of reporting to her was appalling to me. Not because she was young, but because she was stupid. And I said to her, most of the law firms, it was at a law firm, and most of the law firms I've worked at don't like to participate in such and such and such and such. And she said, well, we do. And I said, well, you shouldn't. And then we were done. Then it was over, because she knew that I knew more than she did, because I gave her 5 reasons why we shouldn't. Don't you all do that. You're going to talk about what a great match it is, point by point by point, and you'll be much less of a threat.
Sounds like a memorable experience. Yes, we have one last, oh no, now we have 2 questions. Do you want either of these questions, or shall we call it here?
You know what? I'm going to say for both of them, write to me. Okay. I can't be available for everybody writing to me, but for those 2, please, if you could forward it, Whitney, that would be great. And I'll be glad to answer them. Okay. Because I don't like disrespecting other people's time, and we are over time. So
great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Alice.
Thank
you. So appreciate it.
These were great questions, by the way. Usually I get such bad ones. So this school is as good as it's supposed to be, I guess. I found out something.
You're saying them on camera, so.
I did. That's right. Use it, Some weird guy in New York City said. Anyway, have a great night. Thank you, Whitney. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ellis. It's been such a pleasure. We really appreciate it.
Okay. Have a great evening.
All right. Have a great evening. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Take care.